Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we are going through the centrist dad-in-waiting podcast, Politics Joe, with their take on Labour's cuts to benefits, which is about the only major thing that Labour has done that I can say, oh thank God at least they're doing something right. Of course, in the back of my mind the whole time, hearing about these cuts which should save about $5 billion by 2030, you can't help but think, well, they can find $18 billion to give to Mauritius to give away the Chagos Islands. So really, do they have their priorities straight? Anyway, that is a question that Politics Joe has decided to take upon themselves, so let's go through this podcast clip. Take it away, Politics Joe.
Elon Musk is cutting Social Security. Rachel Reeves was originally going to go after PIP payments, but it now looks like they've doubled down after a cabinet meeting in which there was apparently a little row.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll go into details, but there is a lot of the cabinet that is not happy with this, and I'm not being funny, I would expect some sort of major reshuffle after this. The reason that the cabinet are not happy is because they all thought they were getting into these positions to effectively throw money at problems that the Tories refuse to do because they're evil. Turns out they've hit the wall of reality, and actually they have absolutely no budget whatsoever, and in fact are told, you actually need to cut more than the Tories, which is basically what people like me were shouting at the Tories for years.
All of this speculation, by the way, was quelled by Wes Streeting over the weekend, who, during an interview with Laura Kuenssberg, said multiple times that he didn't even know what the policy was on cutting welfare, and it was total rubbish, and that actually no one had even spoken about it in cabinet.
Oh wow, this is the type of thing you'd start seeing in the Tories after about 5 years, and that was during a coalition, by the way. You know, this should not be happening within the first year of you being elected. But clearly Reeves and obviously the Prime Minister know that Cabinet are not going to like this, and therefore they've clearly kept it hidden from them. And obviously someone started leaking it, and then because of that they've been forced to effectively announce it to Cabinet and the country. And a lot of Labour supporters are not happy. Whereas my mind goes to, wow, is the country really that bad that Labour now have to do what everyone said the Tories were doing? Is that how bad the finances are? And yet they're still finding $18 billion to give to Mauritius. That's the most amazing part.
Which is weird, because I did speak to someone who was in the cabinet meeting who told me that there had been.
Well, sounds like West Streeting, isn't it? Wouldn't lie.
But I don't know, maybe the person who said that to me, maybe they lied.
Maybe they were lying.
Oh, it's chaos all in the Labour Party. It's getting worse in the cabinet. Again, I've said it for some time. The Labour Party honeymoon was over in about a month, if that. And we're already at the point where, I mean, I've already said it in the video title, but there is a ridiculous comparison made in this. All because it turns out that you cannot have thousands upon thousands of people on PIP who clearly don't deserve it. I mean, you go on TikTok, you see ridiculous things like this. Where you have people with autism showing up on TikTok that they got a free car through PIP. I mean, look at this guy. He doesn't exactly look disabled, does he? A little bit eccentric maybe, but this is a guy that could probably have a job. Now, I'm aware I'm making a lot of assumptions from a 15-second TikTok there. However, it is very annoying when they are showing off that they can dance and they get a free car for their ability to dance like a bit of a weirdo on camera. I can do that. I get nothing.
I thought this was really interesting because I was talking to another Labour advisor, and he pointed out to me that he'd contacted the Commons Library to ask them if there would needed to be a procedural vote. Could she just cut PIP payments without it actually having to go to a vote? And then that has sort of played out really interestingly in the last few days, because Labour MPs have suddenly realised that they may have to actually walk through the division lobby. Ooh. So they may actually have to, instead of being able to just sort of hide under the shadow of Rachel Reeves making a cut, they would actually have to walk through the yes or no lobby.
So long story short on that one, Labour MPs are going to have to vote on this, and they're probably going to have the whip enforced. They're going to get a lot of angry letters from constituents who voted for them to not do any sort of austerity. And this is the really funny thing. I've said for ages that we didn't really have austerity, because all austerity really means to people is spending cuts. We kind of had austerity because we had tax rises, but spending was going up year on year by 2013. So it was technically austerity because they were reducing the deficit, but they were only really doing it through tax rises. Now this time around, we've got Rachel Reeves. She's realised the tax rises aren't actually enough. We've kind of gone past the Laffer curve's peak, so we're now getting you're getting diminishing returns on taxes whenever you raise them, and so she's had to start making spending cuts. And it turns out there is a very good possibility, in fact it's almost certain, that MPs are going to have to vote on this. And it's going to be the funniest thing in the world for Labour MPs to have to defend this.
And that would be interesting for the next election, if there's going to be more independent candidates standing in their constituencies. People, potential independent alliance members standing to, like, we saw like people from the Workers' Party and the Green Party doing pretty well, almost unseating West Streeting, for instance.
Yeah, it's an idea I kind of went off recently because it turns out the Greens are probably worse than ever, but you got to stop overestimating the average voter in Britain, quite frankly. An awful lot of them just vote for things that they think will give them free stuff. That's why a lot of people vote. That's why an awful lot of people vote Labour, because they're in a public sector union or even a private sector union, and they'll get more money if they vote Labour because public sector pay rises. Or obviously, if you're on some sort of benefits, you'll vote Labour because you don't want to lose your benefits to those austerity Tories. And then, well, it turns out, they were doing that quite realistically. In fact, there's probably no doubt in my mind that there is no doubt in my mind even that Tories probably wanted to go further on their spending cuts, but couldn't because it was politically impossible. It's still basically politically impossible as well. But the thing is, you've got a cohort of under 40s who do just want to be able to aspire in Britain, but every time there's a vote, it goes the opposite direction. And so an awful lot of them are moving either to Dubai, to Australia, to Canada. These seem to be the three main places I see people move to, or Abu Dhabi's another one, simply because they can make so much there. Because their skills and their value is actually more appreciated in their wage. Doesn't really happen here, and the only party that seems to want to do anything about that's Reform.
Having a big billboard that says this person voted for cuts to disabled people isn't a great look.
Massively, and particularly in the context of a resurgent Atlanticist, nationalist, populist right. There we go. Fucking hell, that's a way to describe a political grouping.
Oh no, let's have good relations with our cousins across the pond. That would be a terrible thing. But it is absolutely amazing. It's been said for quite some time that actually the best chance to bring down immigration and get benefits cut is to actually let the Labour Party do it. One, because then the right wing don't have to take the brunt of having to do it themselves and have the constant attacks of, the nasty party, etc., etc. But also they basically have to spend less political capital to actually do it. Because who are the socialists going to vote for instead of Labour? All right, maybe they'll vote Green, maybe they'll vote for George Galloway's party, maybe they'll vote Independent, but at the end of the day, it's quite hard to actually break these things. You've had splinter left-wing parties for years. You've rarely had, not quite rarely, the last large-scale right-wing splinter movement was UKIP, and that died a death due to Gerard Batten and, obviously, let's say, our circles getting involved in it. It turns out our circles are not very good at mainstream politics. And now, obviously, you've got Reform, which is out competing the Tories. However, on the left, you've never really had anything to properly try and fight Labour, at least, in the past century since they existed. You could maybe argue the SDP, but again, that was a rare blip in the middle of a inter-election period, and they never really did massively well in the actual votes. And so Labour have been chugging along quite nicely because the general consensus is, well, Lib Dems, what even is their policy? Nobody knows at this point, and basically nobody trusts them, especially millennials don't trust them after the whole student loan thing, or student fees thing. Greens are just seen as basically the weed party full of weirdos, where the co-leaders, a guy who used to have a hypnotherapy business where his main attraction was getting women to hypnotise them to grow their boobs. Just weird things like that. And then you've got George Galloway, who, the left wing of the Labour Party find a bit too racist and a bit too Islamist as well for some people as well. So these splinter groups never really have mass appeal, and this is the thing with the general centre-right parties, like UKIP used to be and like Reform are now. They do have general mass appeal because the country generally is centre-right. That is generally where people are. That's what people have voted for probably centuries. It's just politicians lie, promises are broken, the history of the Tories in the 20th century is basically not having a spine enough to actually make the fights that they were voted in for, apart from when Margaret Thatcher got in, and she managed to keep the Tories in for nearly 20 years. Granted, she was kicked out by them after 10, but, the momentum kept going that John Major could get in twice as well. And so with that disadvantage already put forward by left-wing parties, I think it's actually quite rare you'll see an alternative movement. There's a lot of people in the Labour Party who aren't actually socialist, who simply vote for them out of basic normie self-interest. But as soon as they realise that self-interest is gone, where they're going to go? That'll be the interesting one, because left-wingers are obviously going to splinter off to the Workers' Party, to independents, and to the Greens, but the socialist vote's honestly quite small. That's why they had to basically Gramsci their way into the institutions. As you can see with Politics Joe, they are effectively funded by Irish foreign interests. And as I keep saying, they're basically apprentices to be the new media elite, but I think they're going to get to a point where they can get into the mainstream, and it's going to be completely different to what they're expecting, because basically I think the right wing are currently winning the culture war. That's genuinely what I think here.
Where people like Steve Bannon on Gavin Newsom's podcast are very pro Medicaid, are very pro social security, and actually one of the great sort of battles going on within the MAGA movement is between the sort of more tech bro libertarians like Musk, who want to cut these type of programs, and nationalist populists like Bannon, who understand that MAGA voters are on social security, and cutting those programs. That's going to be a big fight within the MAGA movement.
I think even the tech bros understand the basics of social security and universal healthcare. It's not necessarily that they're against them per se. The problem they have is that they really want to get rid of the whole free rider issue, which frankly basically everyone does. You don't want people fraudulently claiming these things who shouldn't have them. There's not many people in the world who really like to see people homeless or, let's say, on the street dying of a drug overdose. There's also not many people in the world who actually want to see people suffer. The problem a lot of libertarians have is, well, the way government do it, because it's remarkably inefficient usually. And so the argument back from libertarians isn't let them die. The argument back is make a charity and help them out. Because the incentives are to make that work a hell of a lot better, because if you don't do your job as a charity, which by the way a lot of charities now don't, then the money goes elsewhere. The reason I say charities nowadays don't is because I used to give to Shelter and then looked into what they actually do, and I found out most of that money doesn't actually go directly to men's shelters or women's shelters for the homeless and things like that. It goes mainly to their lobbying groups. And I don't particularly want to fund socialist lobbying groups, so I stopped giving them money. But they wouldn't be incentivised to do that if the government didn't have absolutely all control on what they do with the welfare system.
I think that's relevant because increasingly the way to understand, in my opinion, this nationalist populist right shift, of which you would look to probably bracket reform within, it is increasingly a cohesive movement and an international movement. And I think if the Labour Party cuts, for example, PIP payments, other forms of disability benefit, it's something that reform could, I'm not saying they will, but if reform does sort of pivot to that nationalist populist way a lot more, that is something that they could really make a lot of hay on, attacking Labour over.
Well, they also have a history of attacking Labour for these things as well, with the pensioners' winter fuel payment, which I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that most of the Reform MPs aren't actually against that, because pretty much everyone on the right agrees that the winter fuel payments are pretty ridiculous, because why do pensioners get even more money when they're frankly already on a benefit of the public pensions? And once again, it's classic democracy. Oh, you're taking away my free money, what the hell? And this is exactly what's happening with PIP as well. So it's got to be one of those things that Reform either aren't going to comment too much on or make a hell of a lot of noise about. But it's one of those things that when they get into power, basically they can just excuse, we've got so much work to do on the immigration issue and other economic issues that kind of has to come last. It's one of those things of don't say the quiet part out loud.
There's an argument there, though, that Rachel Reeves' economic policy has gone to the right of Thatcher, because Thatcher might have closed the mines, but she did at least let people go on the dole.
It's just a nut statement, isn't it? the PIP is going to be slightly harder to get, and they are freezing the payments where they are at the moment, which is nearly 10 grand a year at the top. If you qualify for full PIP, you get 9.5 grand a year or something like that. And I'm being told that freezing it there is to the right of Margaret Thatcher. They're also making changes to universal credit, cutting them a bit to try and encourage people to get back to work, because the whole idea of universal credit is that you can only get on it when you're jobless. It's an out-of-works benefit. And again, these are way higher than what they will have been during Margaret Thatcher's day, even as a proportional, in line with inflation type statistic. And yet I'm being told that pumping the brakes on this sort of thing slightly to save $5 billion a year somehow makes it to the right of Thatcher, which is just how ridiculous this centrist dad in waiting podcast is. It's run by people who have no idea what the history of Britain was actually like. People like this genuinely think that Britain was always a socialist state, and yet at the same time they're constantly told that Victorian Britain was the worst thing ever, even though it was the best place to live at the time, simply because some children were chimney sweeps. God, do you know what kids were like before the Victorian times, before they were chimney sweeps? Because a lot of them would die from what they did.
The line is totally inconsistent, though, because the programme that they've been presenting to us for the last couple of months has been like, we want to get people back into work and we want to help people get back into work.
Yeah, and people are going to be put off that if they're able to get universal credit, along with a whole load of PIP, along with having a job that's off the books and that they don't pay tax for because it's all cash in hand. This is how a lot of people on either PIP or universal credit actually go about their lives. Maybe not the majority, I'm not necessarily saying that. But you ask a lot of people actually have anecdotes of people they know who are on universal credit and working cash in hand to avoid tax. Either as cash in hand cleaners, cash in hand barbers, cash in hand tradesmen. It's a good way to go about it. You get money off the government, plus you barely pay any tax. It's the best of both worlds, and that gives them an income that's actually probably higher than just being on a minimum wage job and climbing up the ladder. In fact, citizens journalist Max Tempers goes through an awful lot of PIP forums and mobility forums to see how people are actually just playing the system. Here's an example he has where a woman is saying that her daughter currently goes to and from school in transport procured by the local authority, i.e. a taxi. And so what she does is they could take her as parents would a normal child and actually get paid in petrol money by the council, because all they do is they ask the council, okay, can you drop my daughter off in a taxi? They say yes, and then they register their own mobility car as a taxi, and then from there they don't mention it's a mobility car to the council, obviously, but from there they end up getting £60 to £70 per day for taking their daughter to and from school. Like, this is a system that is being played quite openly. These are people that you can find if you go to these forums and no one's bothering, because instead, touching this might open the door to take mobility cars off everyone. Which I'm sorry, but all I can think is, okay. I think I'd rather have that than have this obviously ridiculous rinsing of the taxpayer. But the reality is that you can find a sensible middle ground. It's probably not that difficult. But if I was given a choice between one or the other, yeah, I'd rather not be rinsed like this.
Taking away someone's accessibility car, I would argue, would prevent them from getting into work. So it doesn't quite add up, right?
Well, working from home's a much bigger option now. The whole point of mobility cars, and I kind of get it, if you literally need a car to get around, I can understand it. Say you're missing a leg and it's too much to try and walk anywhere, and you really do need a disabled spot, it makes sense. But I showed that TikTok before of the autistic kid dancing because he got his mobility car. He clearly doesn't need a mobility car. That's just absurd. In fact, another thing I find quite absurd is that part of the PIP assessment is actually working out if you can even drive and if you can even sort out journeys. If that's part of PIP, why would you then have a mobility car scheme on PIP if part of the PIP assessment is can you even drive? There's a lot of very confusing things around this, and because there's so many confusing things, people have now worked out how to play the system and have entire forums and Facebook groups effectively training people on how to play the system to get as much money as they can. And again, from what I know of people who've done PIP, it's a complete lottery if you get someone who is quite nice and will actually do what they can to help you get money that you probably do deserve. Say there's someone I know who had arthritis in his hip and he can barely get up and down without decent help. He struggles himself. He can do it, but usually he'll need someone else to help him up. And so when he was in his assessment, he tried to say, I can do this, that and the other. It's just very painful. And then when he saw what the person had actually written about it, it basically made him sound like a cripple. And the reason for that is because if you give any inkling at all that you can do something yourself in your own self-assessment, you lose everything. But you don't get anything. I know people who've applied for PIP, and they've basically been told, unless you have brain surgery, you do not get PIP. And the amount of people on PIP, I do not believe you need some sort of surgery to get on it. Hell, there's people with autism on PIP. I think a lot of people on PIP have autism as their main disability. And autism can be severe, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it's a spectrum. And if you're self-assessing and you know you need to make worst-case scenario case for yourself, people are going to lie about that.
Yeah.
If you want to make it easier, there are a lot of people who are on, say, prescription medicines who don't feel that they can go into work, and Labour wanted to offer them job coaches and they wanted to offer them therapy to get, to help them get back into the workplace. If you cut all of the support before they're, what are they going to do?
Yeah, I'm not being funny, but a lot of these people probably don't go to the job centre. In fact, a big argument from people on PIP is that, we can't actually get to work without, this helps us get to work. Which again, I suppose I can see the argument of, this just, tops up their income every month so that they're able to live a relatively comfortable life. But then again, you get posts like this. Again, something Max Temper's found. Do you seriously expect someone who uses a power chair to be able to clean and look after their garden? For the love of God, stop being a crab in a bucket, Theo. Alternatively, downsize. I can't afford my own garden, let alone paying for some other C-words gardener. Or perhaps you could shut the F up, you sad human being. This is the thing. There are lots of people out there who can't afford a garden. And yet, those are people paying tax to people like this who think they're entitled to a garden because they live in a power chair. Now, being in a power chair, fair enough. Maybe you do need PIP for that. Totally fine. But people have to make sacrifices all the time. I've made plenty of sacrifices over the last couple of years. It just happens. It's part of life. And I don't see how it's fair to ask, people like me who are being the productive ones in society to have to make even more sacrifices, frankly, for people in power chairs who may well be productive if they work from home, but to the point where they can afford a gardener. Okay, granted I can actually do my own garden work, but if I couldn't do it or couldn't afford it, yeah, I'd move. I've had to move somewhere that was not necessarily my ideal at the time. It's turned into my ideal because I love the place so much, thank God for that. But it is seen as incredibly unfair that these people get cars, gardeners and cleaners and can afford it, while the rest of us are scraping by, especially when we're the ones that are, frankly, allowing that to even happen. Maybe we actually hold the cards here.
Previously we had tax and spend, now we have tax and cut.
Oh, those austerity 2.0 Tories, they were tax and spend, were they? They were what you were wanted under Labour, and now we have tax and cut. That's incredible. That's incredible. It's almost like the right wing were right the whole time.
May I make a point with the car?
Yeah.
You don't need the car to go to work now. Thanks to the marvels of modern technology, anyone can be a productive worker with just a headset and an internet connection.
Yeah, data entry, admin work can even be done online now. I know loads of people that do that. You can just write reports from home because that's what a lot of companies want. Teamwork online, totally fine these days. Sure, those jobs need to be offered, but again, a lot of people seem to miss the point. I mean, I know I'm going to get these comments again, but I get people claiming that, I'm autistic and I can never get a job because they don't like to hire autistics. That's illegal for a start, and secondly, they actually do because they have quotas to fill out for diversity, equality and inclusion. Companies are literally incentivized to hire disabled people on every level. So a lot of them probably will be offering more and more jobs for disabled people because it helps them on the statistics front. Because companies literally get fined if they don't hire enough people. So they're directly incentivized to hire people like that. And it's correct. Why do you need a mobility car if you can work from home? You don't. You need a car to go to the shops. I'm sorry, delivery is normal these days. Oh, but what if they want to go out? It's not good that they're inside all day. Sure, I agree. Most of these people should have friends and family that are willing to take them out. I know disabled people that I help out to get outside and have a life. Hell, I used to do it with my grandmother. It's, there are lonely people out there, sure, who probably are disabled. Sure, those are very specific circumstances, but there's so many people on it, there is no way that is the majority of cases. I just don't believe that.
Plug in, baby.
No, you don't worry, guys. You don't need the car to be a productive member of society, to be a cog in the capitalist machine.
All right, let's say you do need a car then. Why do you need a new Beamer? Why do you need a new Mercedes? Because this is the type of car that you can get. 1 in 5 new cars in 2024 was bought through mobility, and an awful lot of them were electric cars because the general consumer probably can't afford them because they're buying electric cars for disabled people. Why can't it be the cheapest car on the market that is just there to get people around for the basic need for a car, to get them from point A to point B, if they really need one? This is another problem with it. They are getting, like £80,000 cars. Oh, they're leased and it still costs us PIP. Yeah, but you're still getting the best deal in the world. Insurance and MOT is paid for by the government as well, by the way. So don't give me that nonsense.
Don't worry. You can be part of a wonderful service economy. That'll be fulfilling.
I'm not being funny, but if you're disabled, what other part of the economy are you actually going to be part of? We're not in the L.S. Lowry days of people shuffling along on carts with no legs because they lost their legs in a textile machine. Those people could hardly work labour-intensive jobs, and generally production, manufacturing, construction, they're all fairly physical. The rest of it's service, where you don't need to be physical. I don't really know what his point is there.
Do you know what's interesting about what you just said? I know you were making a joke there, but that is actually the point, because about all these lines being inconsistent and the web of, or the myriad of total dichotomies, because Labour have sort of followed down the same path as the Jacob Rees-Mogg. We don't want you working from home. We'd like you back in the office to stimulate the economy and growth. But also, we're not going to help you get there anymore. So you should probably just work from home. If you have a disability, why do you need to go outside when you can just work from home? But also, you should not be working from home. You should be working from the office.
I mean, they're laughing and throwing a whole load of kind of nonsense together. This isn't what's happening. The changes being made to PIP and universal credit, they're actually quite low level. I mean, there's a reason it's only saving $5 billion a year. They're making it harder for people to get because when you're assessed, you have about 4 different categories that you're asked about, and they've decided that you only now get PIP if you are severely disabled in one, and then the rest can add up points as well, like it used to, where it used to be if you, say, get 1 point in each, you'd at least get basic PIP. Which is fair enough, because PIP is supposed to be for people who are severely disabled, wouldn't you know it? And mobility cars obviously come off that. So if you're severely disabled, you're still able to get a mobility car. They've not gone after the mobility mafia, who, as I say, have a whole scheme set up to get the most they can from the government and from the taxpayer. There's no appreciation of that side of things here, obviously, because these people just assume that everyone's honest for some reason. It's the old thing of, it's really easy to hate the rich because it's pretty obvious when they're being liars and cheating people out of money, but do you have the ability to hate the poor? Because the poor will do. The poor people who have the same attitude. It's just obviously their power isn't as great, which is fair enough and should be appreciated. But when they are abusing their privileges, that should be stopped.
You either log onto the company portal and work on a remote desktop, or you're watching YouTube, but you do not go outside. The fresh air is not for you.
It is just ridiculous to try and claim that PIP being frozen at just under £10,000 is equivalent to keeping these people indoors all day is ridiculous. Again, the most disabled people are still going to get their money, and they still get their mobility cars. It's just a complete distraction from the issues that are genuinely happening with fraud on the damn thing. Another thing that people always bring up is, there's 0% fraud in PIP according to the DWP. The DWP are not going to admit that there are fraudulent claims through their own process. Just like whenever the police investigate themselves, they rarely ever find any wrongdoing. It's obvious that you can only believe independent reviews into these types of things, and there's not one that's been done. So we're going to have to base it off the fact that we can see literal people making literal posts about how to fraudulently claim PIP and mobility cars.
Do you know what? They could just sort of take people's brains out, couldn't they, and put them in jars? Maybe that would work instead.
They'd love
I mean, this is what most of the rest of the podcast just descends into, just making really bad jokes that don't reflect what's actually going on. You cannot say that freezing PIP and making it slightly harder for the non-severely disabled to get is the same as saying we should take people's brains and put them in jars to make them productive. The reality of the situation, as I say, is that a lot of people manage to get on PIP, they make it out worse than their situation actually is, and then they work cash in hand, and overall, it gives them a middle-class income. As Max Tempers said, it's basically a neo-aristocracy, because they are not working to anywhere near the level that productive people are working, Nick 30, and it basically makes them want to stay here, because they get a load of stuff at the taxpayers' expense, while the taxpayers are all thinking of moving, so what are you going to do about that when there's no money left? Anyway, they finish off with another anecdote from the Labour advisor mentioned at the beginning.
He said to me he wasn't actually sure that they were going to pursue the PIP cuts, because he thought at that moment in time the spending review already had gone off to the Office of Budget Responsibility. So the savings wouldn't have been factored in. So he said either the savings had come back from the OBR and there wasn't enough, they'd miscalculated, or this was almost like a sort of shadow creep. It was like, let's say something truly abhorrent, let's leak something truly abhorrent so that it sort of covers up the rest of the cuts that we're going to do.
If that's actually what's going to be happening, again, maybe zero-seaters were right. Maybe you do just need to put the country in such a state that it forces Labour to be the ones that have to make all these cuts rather than the Tories. Unfortunately, Tories were a bit moronic and voted in Kemi Badenoch, who, from the comments I got in yesterday's video, a lot of people don't even realise is actually the leader of the damn thing.
And then then they could cancel it and say it was all speculation and it was never actually going to happen. And they could hide under the cloak of darkness.
Media management.
I mean, it is possible that they're putting out all this bad news about PIP. I don't think they are. PIP seems to be one of the easiest goals in the world because, frankly, it's been brought up quite a few times, just verbatim in conversations I've had, even with my barber, where everyone just seems to have an anecdote of someone they know who's on PIP, who can just get around fine. Not necessarily they get a mobility car on top. In fact, I don't personally know anyone who's scammed for a mobility car. However, there are certainly people on PIP who frankly shouldn't have it. As I say, people I know who have been told they need brain surgery to actually manage to get PIP, and other people who manage to get it for a slight skin rash. Clearly a big problem with it, and clearly it's a problem that everyone kind of agrees, though somewhat quietly, is a problem that needs to be sorted. And here we are on Politics Joe with these people who probably don't know anyone who's disabled, making all these vapid assumptions that not having a mobility car means that you can never leave the house, despite the fact that an awful lot of these people already have friends and family willing to help them. It's just nuts. Anyway, I think that covers everything I wanted to go through for today. Just there you go, Politics Joe, centrist dad, and they spent most of that video, by the way, trying to claim that they think things are going to be really bad for people on PIP and Motability, just laughing about the whole thing. Makes me think they're not particularly serious about the whole issue, and this is just, an easy attack on Labour because they're doing something we don't like, which is always a classic. Anyway, with that, it's shill time. Laughing at the Guardian on Saturday, Tosh News next week, all that good stuff. Should be getting into gaming streams again soon. When exactly, I don't know yet, but, we'll see about that. As for how you can help out, please subscribe, leave a like, give me a comment telling me what you think about all this. And, of course, you can also give me super chats and super thanks in any video or stream I do, and also become a member and get access to all my previous streams. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.